Hey everyone, my name's Ian Mile. I'm a partner at a cloud native consultancy, and I'm here to talk about a very sexy subject: compliance automation. So in the room, who have we got? Have we got? If you're a coder, put your hand up. Oh, it's about half. Okay, and the rest of you? I know there's a journalist in here. I can spot you. Oh, it's two. Are there any compliance officers in here or project managers around financial software? Just engineers. Okay, I'll have to guess what the rest of you are then. Okay, well, if you're more techie, then we could get into more of the technical side of this if you want. It's really up to you. There's not that many people here, and I don't have to talk about certain things if we're not interested. So I want to basically, the précis of the talk is here. So I got involved in this project about a year ago. We're a consultancy. I work for a consultancy called Container Solutions, and we work in the cloud native space. So we help companies move towards cloud native ways of working. So it's a bit of DevOps, but it's also generally quite heavy on using cloud APIs and automation software to build software in such a way that it's made for the cloud. And as part of that work, we work with a lot of financial companies, some big financial companies. And does anyone here work in finance? Just one? And you're a coder, if I recall, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you must have dealt with compliance issues as you've worked in that field. So I worked for Barclays for 3.5 years, building a platform, OpenShift platform. And one of the things I found was that we were trying to automate everything, but when it came to compliance, what would happen was that someone would come around every 6 months and say, "Are your disks still encrypted?" and how many teams are on your systems, and do you have proper secrets management? Are your ports managed properly, and so on. So we thought that was not very cloud native, and so we decided to do something about it. And the way we wanted to do something about it was using an open source project that we built, and where possible, open tools. So I'm going to talk a little bit about open source and some of the challenges we have around that as we're growing as a project, and OSCAL as well. One thing before I get into the tool itself, it's very much aimed at the compliance manager for reasons that I'll go into. It's not a security project, although it has a relationship with security tools. It is not in itself a security tool, but there is some overlap. At the end, I'll do a demo. So I mentioned that Container Solutions, the company I work for, has a history of building open source software. So we built the external secrets operator for Kubernetes, which is now some sort of standard. We joined with various other companies to help build that as well, including GoDaddy were the main ones, although they're not listed on there anymore. I'm not sure why. We also built the Kubernetes Java SDK, so we've built various tools around that area. Okay, so as I mentioned, traditionally controls management. Does everyone here know what a control is? Some nods. Okay, so controls are the things you have to comply with in order to be compliant, or rather, these are the methods that are applied to ensure that you are compliant. So this is a sort of stereotypical image of a compliance officer, auditor. They'll come in with a clipboard and say, "Are you doing the right things?" You say, "Yes, we are, honest." They'll say, "Well, show us some screenshots." you might, yeah, you show them a screenshot. They might even take pictures. They'll take copies or whatever. They'll ask for evidence. They'll put that into a PDF, and then that PDF will be signed off and stored somewhere, and therefore that is then that's your audit done for another 6 months. And they'll say, we'll see you in 6 months, and then we'll talk again. So that's the traditional view of it. You'll often see things like this, a spreadsheet of the controls that you're operating against, and then how you'll have lots of fields like how you're, which standards these apply to, what you're operating against. So this is sort of a very typical way of managing it. There'll very often be, Confluence is sort of a classic thing now. When you start a project, you'll have controls in a table in Confluence, and then you'll use that to track whether it's acceptable what you've done or not, and so on. So why change this, right? So the first and most obvious one is that it's very expensive, and I got this 2017 figure from internationalbank.com. Banks spend $270 billion a year on compliance, and that isn't just tech compliance. That's all kinds of compliance, some of which can't easily be automated. But it's quite shocking that 10% of banks' operating costs can be attributed to compliance. So it's a big part of their business, and it's a big area of spend. Another reason is that it's not real time. So if you are uncompliant, how do you know? Well, you don't really know in that traditional model until the person comes around in 6 months and checks again. And if they're doing a good job, they'll find you out. But if not, they won't. So you won't be able to tell a regulator the current compliance status of your systems, except to reference that process that you've been going through. This has become really important because of DORA. So I don't know if people were in the plenary, but I think it was Lewis mentioned that the EU had made a law before they decided what the law is. So he was probably talking about DORA. And DORA is a Operational Resilience Act in the European Union, which has just come into effect, but no one really knows what it means. The reason people don't know what it means is that the act itself is quite vague, and it talks about increasing real-time compliance requirements, that you have to have a real-time view of your compliance situation in your financial sector business, and no one knows what that means yet. We'll only know when the EU start fining people. So that's another problem. That's another reason to change. And it's not scalable. If you have more compliance to do, more compliance checking to do, you have to hire more people. So we started this open source project called Compliance Framework. Its aim is to be a single point hub for compliance managers to be able to get a view of the current compliance situation in their business, right? So we use various open source tools, Golang, OSCAL, which is a sort of open source time saver for building stuff around OSCAL, and we use Vue, MongoDB, NATS, and so on. We're working with financial organizations on this. We're under NDA with a few. We're working with the US government, Department of Defense, and NIST. So NIST are the people who came up with the standard, the OSCAL standards that we're building against. Australian banks are talking to us a lot because in Australia the regulators are issuing their regulations in OSCAL now. So they're using this open standard to provide regulatory advice to their banks. So there's a lot of activity over in Australia around this, and a little in America. we're talking to various product companies about building on this as well. And we've even had inquiries from storage tank checkers. So in oil and gas, you've got storage tanks. Those storage tanks are heavily regulated. If they blow up, that's a big deal. So traditionally, someone's gone around with a hammer and hammered these things and to check whether they're still okay. But we're talking to a company that does 3D imaging of storage tanks, and it's still in quite early stages to automate that compliance checking. But what they don't have is a central hub to look at the results of those across the hundreds of storage tanks across the world and figure out, what in real time, what state they're in. So we're talking to them about building that. We're also working with Finos and the Common Cloud Controls group. So Finos is the financial sector open source foundation, and they've got a tool called a set of standards called Common Cloud Controls, and the goal is that we fit into that as well. So a little bit about OSCAL. OSCAL is a NIST standard built around open security. Always forget, Open Security Controls Assessment Standard. When I see OS, I always think open source, but it's open security. And the idea is that rather than PDFs flying around businesses and to auditors and to governments and so on, this is a machine-readable structure that different tools can interoperate with each other. So if you imagine that basically I've got a piece of software that is interested in the controls layer, then I could build on that, and you would produce a document that I could understand, and vice versa. And up to the top, we've got the assessment layer. That's the one we're most interested in at the moment, which is where we do assessments of your current situation that you're in. Okay. OSCAL itself, by the way, has anyone heard of OSCAL? I know at least one person has in the room. Anyone else? No? Okay, so this is becoming the standard, but it's still in the very early stages. Okay. So on the left there is an example OSCAL document. So it's a pretty standard looking YAML doc. It's very cut down. They can be absolutely enormous documents, but basically an application could read that in and present that information to you for you to manipulate and then write reports on and so on. And that's the back end. That is the kind of document that's in the back end of our system, and that our system will produce for you if you want to report on it. I did a blog visualizing OSCAL, so visualizing the relationships between the different entities that are represented within OSCAL. It's on our blog there, blog.container-solutions.com. Okay, a little bit about the architecture, and then we'll do a demo. So we use MongoDB as backend simply because OSCAL is a bunch of JSON documents, so storing it as JSON documents in the backend makes the most sense for now. There may come a point where we want to, the data is quite relational, so we might want to move that to a database, sort of traditional database at some point, but we're using that for now. We have, this can be considered the sort of core of it. This is the server, and we have a UI on top of the server. So essentially you can talk to the server and register your compliance checks against that system, and it stores it in the back end in an OSCAL compliant way. We've also written an agent and plugin structure that allows you to build specific checks for specific contexts. And I'll show you a bit more about that in a moment. But also, if you have an external tool, if you have like a Wiz application, or if you have Lula, or there's lots of tools out there that check whether things are compliant, then that can talk direct to our server and record that data in the back end. Okay, so I'll do a quick demo. Okay, so imagine So imagine you're a compliance officer, and you've got an enormous estate to manage. Here we've got 5 servers. So we've got Cube Prod Worker 4, 3, 2, 1, and we've got Server Ubuntu 2018-1. We've got this has got 2 plugins checking 2 different things. So the plugins are checking the SSH configuration on the servers. It's also checking that the packages are up to date. Each line represents a stream of data, stream of checking data that's coming in. And each one of these has a history. At the top, you see there we've got a graph of compliance over time. And the top line, the black line, is the number of observations in OSCAL parlance, followed by the number of failed checks, 13, and then passed checks, 4. So each of these has this sort of traffic light thing here. So green means okay. Grey is the number of observations or checks that we perform, and red is failure. Okay, so then we've got for each of these we've got a history. So every minute, in this case, we're checking every minute. We've got a check for this sort of SSH check, and each check has this sort of stream. So now, what I'm going to do is imagine you've got like 1,000 of these. That'd be way too much to necessarily understand. I might want to have a view of these that are more. Let's say I'm only interested in the public servers. So each of these checks has a Kubernetes style name value pair set associated with them. So at the top there we've got group is public, owner is auth API, and type of check is apt versions. If I want to winnow this down to just the public servers, there we go. I can search just for group equals public. No, 2 O's. There we go. So I can winnow that search down just to those, and save that as public. So now I've got my public checks. That goes into the assessment plans. So assessment plans again is an OSCAL term that relates to the checks we want to perform on a regular basis. Okay. Now, if I want to also look at a very specific type of check, so we've got these 2 checks. Let's say I just want to look at SSH checks. So I do type equals SSH and group equals, let's call it private. So that's just 2 of those checks. And I can do SSH private. Okay, now I've got 2 assessment plans, and I can view the current state of play for each of these subset of my entire estate. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to fix some of these. So bring my terminal over. Okay. Ooh, no. Oh, you. Why did that not go over? Where's it gone? Oh, there we go. Okay. So let's go docker exec sti. So I'm going to fix this by hand. Oops. But how you decide to fix it is up to you. Okay, thank you. Now, the problem here is we've got some SSH configuration problems. So I'm going to fix this, not cron. SSH HD config D. And so I've prepared this so that I can fix these problematic settings directly. Change that to yes. Okay, so I fixed this on kube prod worker 1, and I have to wait a minute for it to come back, for the results to come back. So while I'm doing that, I'm going to fix the other problem. And the other problem is that this package is out of date. And if we look at if we want to know more details about what's wrong here, this is telling me that my wget version is too low. It should be greater than or equal to 123. So this is telling me that there is that problem. If I now log onto the compose server, there should be a do upgrade. So again, this is prepared. How you do the upgrade, or how you fix the problem, is up to you. If I do upgrade, then it's going to go and upgrade that version of wget for me. In the meantime, we should now see that, yeah, here. So the kube prod worker 1 that I did there has now been fixed. So I've got three greens. If I go into the view here, it's mitigated. So we've got mitigated findings. And you can see the graph is now, the green has gone up and the red's gone down, so I'm now more compliant. If I go into my assessment plans, we've got a view with a graph of the subset of those. So that's improved a bit more because it's more of the checks are on there. And if I go and look at the private ones, nothing's changed because I didn't improve those. Similarly, package version compliance for our out-of-date server here has now moved to 1. If I want to look at the history of that, you can see it's updated. So that, with 1 minute to go, that is briefly what Compliance Framework does. In brief, it's an open system. Anyone can download and run. Anyone can interact with the SDK to build their own checks and plug them in. And yeah, it's an open source project we're building to help compliance officers manage their estates in preparation for these regulatory changes. Thank you. Any questions? Okay.
So, a couple of observations and see if they're definitive choices. First off, there's no concept of a warning.
Sorry?
There's no concept of a warning as presented.
Yeah.
And you know, that particularly stood out to me because you changed an SSH config and you didn't restart the daemon. So the config files changed, but not the daemon. So that might be a warning. But also, do you have any concept of deferral?
Of deferral?
Deferral.
Okay, so this has come up with discussions. So the first point was warnings. As far as I know, OSCAL has no concept of warning. I might be wrong. But again, we're being driven very much by what people are asking us for, and this is not the finished product. I should say, and we're not a product company as well. Our angle on this is to get a consultancy work from it. So yeah, no concept of warning. Deferral has come up because that server might be okay to be like that. The way we would handle that in our current schema is that the plugin can be configured per server or per system you want to check. So you would configure that plugin to say, this is the policy for this server. But I can imagine that if this gets used in a huge production estate, that someone, compliance software would say, just ignore that, you know. So I think that's probably going to come down the pipe. And we've already had to build on, you mentioned the concept of warning. Maybe we have to build that on top. There are other things we've had to build on top. So this concept of a stream of checks doesn't exist in OSCAL either. We've had to layer that on top of the existing schema. So there's probably going to be some interplay between, well, NIST and I know other practitioners in this area. At the moment, OSCAL is pretty theoretical, but the people who are practically applying it are coming up with great ideas like that, or real world concepts that need to be implemented. Okay. Thank you. Okay, thank you.